Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank INBI and Seva Bharat for giving me this wonderful opportunity to be able to present my views in front of all you people. I'll keep it very short. I'll be skipping most of my slides and I'll come straight away to the point of the fiscal cost and if we have the budget space to run a program such as UBI. So as we highlighted in the survey this year, in the UBI chapter, a quasi-universal UBI of 650 rupees per person per month will cost us around 4 to 5% of GDP. Now, what is quasi-universal? 70% of the population. And who are we trying to exclude? We are trying to exclude people who are at the top. Now, again, if you try to target people at the bottom, you run into the problem of various kind of leakages such as exclusion error, inclusion errors, and it's very difficult to target beneficiaries at the bottom. So the best possible way is to try and exclude the top 2 or 3 decile of the population because you can very easily identify the rich people, anyone who's owning a car, anyone who's paying taxes, you can very easily exclude such people out. So ideally it should be universal, but we simply don't have the budget space to run a program which is universal because it will cost you around 6 to 7% of GDP, and that's what we highlighted in the survey as well. Now, if you run UBI just for women, it will cost you half of what a quasi-universal UBI will cost you, which is around 2 to 2.5% of GDP. So where is the budget space? So if you look into the chart, which is based on the budget numbers 2014 actuals, what you see is that the top you have implicit middle class subsidies, which comes out to be around 1% of total GDP. Then we have at the bottom, you see total subsidies, which accounts for roughly around 2%. So if you add these implicit subsidies and other kind of subsidies, you get around 2 to 3% of the GDP, which is available for UBI. And you can perhaps divert these funds easily for a scheme like UBI. But then schemes such as education, spending on pension, police, defense, you cannot just do away with this program. And this fund is simply not available for a UBI. So you have to be very careful about what kind of budget allocation you have to make, what kind of shifts you have to make, what kind of schemes you need to divert funds for UBI to. Now, where do we get rest of the funds from? To understand that, we have to first look into the existing centrally sponsored schemes which we are running and central sector schemes. Now, as Sudipto sir truly, he pointed out that there are around 950 schemes, but that was according to the last year's budget. The latest number now is 675. The number has come down. But if you look into the 2011 Planning Commission report, they pointed out that many of these schemes are very small and allocation is so small that it doesn't make any difference to any of the states, and such schemes should be weeded out. Out of 675 central schemes, there are more than 400 schemes where the allocation is close to 200 crore rupees. And if you do a sum total of all these schemes, you get around 40,000 crore, which can be made available for a scheme like UBI. Also, even the centrally sponsored schemes, which are big, such as NREGA or Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, you run into different kind of issues. There is huge misallocation of resources, meaning that states which are actually good enough and they have high per capita income, most of the spending is being done there. Also, you run into problems like leakages, exclusion error, inclusion error in schemes such as PDS. Also, the administrative cost of running such large number of schemes is simply putting a lot of burden on the state administrative capacity. So we are going to just give you an analysis of the existing schemes. This is based on, so there's some problem here, I think the cell range is missing. Basically, the labels are different states. So what you see here, we have tried to rank states based on their capacity to raise resources. So what you see is that for any centrally sponsored schemes, you have to contribute, say, 20% or 30% depending on the scheme. For a scheme like midday meal, the state has to contribute around 35% to get the rest of the fund from the center. So only if a state has enough resources, the state would be able to contribute the matching grant, which is at 20% or 30%, and in return, it will get the rest of the fund from the center. So it's mostly the rich states which are able to get most of the resource allocation from the center. And what you see at the left hand, you have states like Bihar and UP, and at the corner, right-hand corner, you have states such as Haryana, Kerala, Gujarat, Maharashtra, which are already well off. So most of the resources under centrally sponsored schemes is flowing to already well-to-do states. Now again, this analysis is based on top 5 centrally sponsored schemes which account for roughly 50% of the overall central sponsored schemes funding, and they account for around 540 districts. The analysis is for 19 states, and they account for around 545 districts. So ideally what should happen, that it should not matter whether a poor is in state A or B, the per capita allocation to a poor should roughly be the same, which is your ideal allocation line, as you can see here, the black line. But what you see, as the head count ratio of the states, of the districts go up, the per capita allocation or per capita spending of poor is coming down. So the districts which are poor, which are in more need of funds, they are the ones who are not getting requisite fund under these schemes. Now again, this is something like a Gini coefficient. So what you see, the districts which account for, so we try to rank districts from the poorest to least poor, and states accounting for poorest 40% of the population, they are only getting around 26% of the overall central sector sponsored schemes allocation. And most of the rest is going to the better off districts. This is again a visual representation of the same. So on your left hand side, what you see, the districts highlighted in red are the ones who are poorest. And on the right hand side, what you see, that the districts which are reflected in red are basically having the shortfall in spending, the largest shortfall in spending on poor. So districts which are poor, they're also having shortfall in spending on poor. Ideally, it should be the other way around. I'll skip this slide. Now this is an example of how misallocation may lead to exclusion error, and this is an example of NREGA. So what we have done, we have again calculated deficit or surplus for each of the districts. Deficit meaning if the spending of a district is less than its share in overall poor, then it is in deficit, whereas its spending is more than its share in poor, then it is in surplus. So if you look at the surplus districts, the head count ratio is just 22%. That means the richer districts are basically getting more funds, and for the deficit districts, the head count ratio is 38%, so which are basically poor. Now, what does it mean? So when you don't have enough fund, you cannot provide work to perhaps everyone, and that is reflected here as well. So for deficit districts, the ratio of active to registered worker is only 33%, whereas for surplus districts, it is around 50%. So that is the kind of problem which we are facing right now. We have a lot of schemes which are meant to provide people with basic amenities, with what they need to raise their income resources. But right now, the way it is being allocated, it's mostly the rich districts in rich states which are getting most of the benefit out of it. And perhaps some of these schemes may be used for providing funds for UBI. And then perhaps because you need around 1 to 2 extra percentage of GDP, and if you maybe do away with some of these schemes, you can have some resources available. Plus, if you rule out all the small central sector schemes, again you will have some fund, and then you will have enough fund to kickstart a UBI.
Take care of the others.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.